Welcome to the PropTechBuzz Smart Buildings podcast. With me today, I have Mark Smukler. I hope I'm saying that right as well. He, founder and CEO of Flow. You're based in the US right now. Whereabouts are you?
At the moment, I am just outside New York City in the lovely town of Montclair, New Jersey.
Okay, I'm in I'm in Cambridge, so quite a difference in time zone. But thank you for making time. And obviously, I can't wait to have the conversation with you as well. So one thing as well, Mark is a former founder of Bixby, who were acquired by Alfred, which a lot of people in the industry know. Is there anything you would like to talk about in general when it comes to that experience?
Well, I'm sure we'll touch on it in a few ways. So let's maybe jump into questions and I'll definitely make sure to touch on resident experience and Bixby and Alfred and all the things I learned along the way.
Perfect. Okay. So we have our first question, which is how has the prop tech landscape evolved since your founding experience, and what trends do you foresee shaping its future?
Great. So I entered or kind of started to think about real estate and real estate technology in late 2014. So my background, I'd studied finance at university in New York City at New York University. When I graduated, I worked in investment banking for a small boutique called Stevens, where I worked on merger and acquisition advisory, specifically in the consumer and retail sectors. So real estate was not something that I had a ton of experience in, but I knew that one day I wanted to operate a business, and I had a friend of mine whose name is Alex Oheb Shalom. He and his family had spent the last 3 decades or so uh, in real estate in the New York City area, particularly owning and operating multifamily buildings. And whenever I would talk to Alex, he would tell me a lot about some of the archaic analog processes that they were still relying on to manage their portfolio. And so that's really when I started to get interested in the digitization of real estate, if you will, and ultimately what led me to Bixby. I think if you look back on the 2010s as a decade, you one could argue that it's kind of the third wave of um, of the adoption of technology in the real estate industry and kind of at least like modern history. And what I mean by that is in the 70s and 80s, you kind of had the development of the personal computer, and then you had the creation of businesses like Yardi, right, one of the leaders in the industry today. Um, then in the 90s and 2000s, you really had the growth of the internet, and you had companies like Zillow come to market. In the 2010s, the the general view or the technology that was really developing was smartphones, right? They're the personal computer in your pocket. And I think one of the big examples of companies that took advantage of that development is Uber, right? Who was really created on the back of the development and the proliferation and adoption of the smartphone. In the real estate sector, I think there was a similar view. There was also the narrative that real estate, and this narrative continues, but real estate is one of the largest and oldest asset classes in the world, but had been one of the slowest to adopt technology. And that was, I think if you look at company and startup pitches through the 2010s, like 95% of them probably started or had a slide that started with that in some capacity, right? It's a huge market, and they run it the same way they did centuries ago on pen and paper and transcribing on stone. Not really at this point, but you get what I'm saying. And there's opportunities to digitize and modernize, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I think that a lot of what we thought in the early 2010s was somewhat not proven wrong necessarily, but I think as the real estate industry does, it proved its resilience. Um, uh, on the one hand, it proved its resilience to adopting technology. And on the other hand, it's very good at weeding out the innovations that can have real impact and the ones that don't. And it's okay with staying on processes, even if they're a little bit more painful on older processes. Um, when there's a solution that doesn't have an impact that's worth the switching costs and worth kind of the opportunity or the benefits that it provides. So all that to say that was I kind of said all that to paint the picture of kind of what was going on when I created Bixby with Alex. Um, and in contrast, I think today we're really kind of at the end of that cycle. Um, and that cycle, I mean, for example, when we launched Bixby in 2014, I think there was maybe one dedicated PropTech fund in the market, PropTech VC fund. I think MetaProp maybe founded sometime in like 2012 to 2014. There's probably a couple other funds around at the time, like Modern out of Chicago was probably around. I don't think you had any um, real estate technology prop tech focused VC funds in Europe or the UK at that point. Now you have, I don't know, maybe 100, right? And I think that speaks a little bit to the growth of the VC industry over the last decade, but certainly also the passion for and interest in um, bringing technology solutions to the real estate market. But I said that I think we're kind of at the end of a cycle. So I think if you look across the 2010s in particular, there weren't a ton of winners in the space, right? I mean, unicorns, big businesses. You can point to companies like VTS, can maybe point to companies like Better Mortgage, certainly Airbnb, although they were, a little bit early, kind of founded around 2008. But you didn't see a lot of winners, and I think that there's a few reasons for that I'm sure we'll speak to. I obviously since the war in Ukraine started last March, the entire VC industry has been, and all kind of startups across industries and sectors have really felt the pressure. And you had this period of time where cash was cheap, the interest rates were low, companies were reaching for exponential growth at the cost of profitability. And I think for most people who are in and around startup entrepreneurship, VC, game or market or industry or whatever you want to call it today, realize that it's a very different world than it was 10 years ago for us. You can see that very clearly in the amount of capital that's been deployed in the last 12 months versus, pre-COVID. And I'll kind of wrap up for now by saying, I think that what investors and entrepreneurs found in the last 10 years was building technology for the real estate industry and selling it into the industry is not easy for a few reasons that we'll talk about. That in order to really be a winner in the space, in whatever space that you're building a business in or operating in, you need to really have significant impact. And I think today that's more important than ever. Two ways that you can have impact, two broad ways. What people often say, if you're selling something, it either needs the individual needs to either make money or save money, or at least in like an enterprise sales capacity. Right. If I'm going to the head of Greystar, the head of Related, any large real estate owner or operator, and I'm trying to get them to buy my product, I better like a better tenant experience, a better resident experience, simpler processes and workflows for teams, all of that stuff is well and good. But if it doesn't flow down to the bottom line somehow, right? If it doesn't increase revenues, if it doesn't save costs, it's going to be really hard to sell that product into whoever that decision maker is. And I think everyone that's been building, investing in real estate technology over the last 10 years has like learned that in a very acute way. And now I think you're seeing, for a bunch of reasons, you're seeing kind of entrepreneurs and investors looking for not like deep tech, but like real businesses, real businesses that have real cash flow and profitability. It's why you're seeing the development and interest in like propco opco models. The example would be, Bixby was a resident experience software, right? We provided a web and a mobile application to property management teams so that they could deliver a better resident experience. And part of that was through features that streamline the property management operation, like helping them organize and process maintenance requests faster. And part of that was allowing them to offer features or services that their building or the management operation doesn't. For example, a marketplace of home services like dry cleaning and housekeeping and moving and storage. But we would charge landlords or property managers $1 per unit per month to use the system. And you really need significant scale to build a big business around that, right? If you want to get to 1 million in MRR, monthly recurring revenue, you basically need 1 million units, right? And at the time, there was like 25 million multifamily or build to rent, as you call it in the UK, units in the US. And that's the whole market, right? Um, and so I think a lot of investors, entrepreneurs realize that it's not easy. And by the way, that's a relatively small company, right? 1 million in MRR, that's 12 million in ARR. Like you're starting a company today, you better have visibility or straight line to 100 million in ARR if you want to build a billion-dollar business, right? And so when I speak to investors in the space today, a lot of them are interested in, and you see this in companies like Outsite, who recently raised, I think, 300 million or so to acquire properties. You see this in Adam Newman's new company Flow, which raised, I think, like 300 million from Andreessen Horowitz to buy, partially to buy multifamily buildings. So you're seeing investors really be interested in, well, hey, we don't just want you to build a technology solution that does this one thing for the manager or the operator, or the owner, but what does it look like for you to be the owner, right? What does it look like when you're not generating $1 per apartment per month, but you're generating $1,000 per apartment per month because you're collecting the rent, right? And building technology on top of your operation that allows you to be more efficient, deliver a better experience, and outperform the competition. So I think it kind of went from like how do you build the next Airbnb to like how do you build the next Related, the next Greystar, the next British Land, right? Um, and so I think that that's probably one of the major ways or the major characteristics that I've seen change in the industry over the last decade. Like you have to do the hard things, being lean and is important, right? But that's being lean at the sake of for the sake of or like at the sacrifice almost of the top line, right? Being a software company, there's a reason why technology companies are the most valuable businesses in the world, at least from like a multiple perspective. And that's because of like distribution and economics of scale, right? Um, for Bixby to acquire another 1,000 units that use the software doesn't cost the incremental cost goes, decreases over time because we built the software once, right? And from there it scales. Um, but but the scale is hard to achieve. And so for example, I think Alpaca is one of the venture funds that I think of who I think have gotten really, really smart. They've been in multiple sectors. They came from a traditional real estate background before investing in technology. And I think they're one of the groups that are kind of championing this propco opco opportunity and at least interest in it as investors. And they've written some really thoughtful pieces about it. So if your audience is interested in learning more about how VCs are looking at these opportunities today, I think they're a good place to start in terms of a group that goes in depth on some of the things I'm talking about. Anyway, that
Okay,
was a long answer, but hopefully I touched on some of the important pieces.
that was a great answer. I did want to ask then, because we had kind of shifted also towards today. You did mention that one of the main issues that we were seeing that is that the real estate industry, in terms of adopting technology, are a lot slower, or they were a lot slower than all the other industries that you were looking around or you're seeing. So for a traditional real estate company that today that's still kind of apprehensive about prop tech and implementation in their business, what would you say are some of the most exciting opportunities? Like, for example, obviously streamlining their processes, like you just said. What else would you say?
Yeah. So I think companies in the real estate space they were slow to adopt technology, but I think COVID changed a lot, first of all, right? Um, when we started Bixby in 2015, we spent a lot of time convincing owners and operators of the benefits of moving off of pen and paper and digitizing their operation, both from like an internal property management perspective and the service that they can deliver to the end customer, the resident. We spent a lot of time, us and other companies in our category, Alfred included, um, spent a lot of time educating to a certain extent owners and operators on who their end customer is, right? And adopting a more customer-centric focus, a more service-oriented focus on their business. Kind of went from we were trying to drive a change in perspective from my asset is the building, and all I need to do is maintain the building and provide as few amenities and services as possible to to like deliver a good business, right? And we tried to convince the industry that, well, actually the resident is their greatest asset. And if they don't put the resident at the center of their business in a very kind of Amazon type start with the customer and work backwards type way, then they were dinosaurs and they weren't going to be able to compete in the industry over time. Um, I, I didn't participate. By the time COVID rolled around, Alfred had already acquired our business, which was in the middle of 2019. And I was no longer, I had worked at Alfred for 2 years post the acquisition as part of our earnout, and but then had moved on to start Flow. But I kind of looking back, I wish that I was still involved in the resident experience property management software business at the time of COVID, because I saw a rapid acceleration of the adoption of technology, right? Because landlords that we would speak to and would say, look, Mark, I've been running my business the same way for 50 years. Your technology sounds great, but we don't need it. We're okay, right? We can do things with pen and paper and the super handles most things at the building. But all of a sudden, you had to adopt at least digital communication tools, right? And so I think for companies and individuals that were in that kind of category around 2020, 2021, really saw, a major adoption of technology. And so I do think that in a broad sense, real estate companies today look very different than they did pre-COVID. I think today there's a different problem. Um, Over the last 30 years and definitely the last 10, you've had like an explosion in the number of companies and solutions that a real estate company can adopt. And you obviously know this from the work that you do. And the challenge is them being disparate and disconnected and identifying which is the right solution for my real estate operation, or which are the right solutions. How do I connect them in a way where they can speak to one another, such that I'm not logging in here for this, logging in there for that? And how do I kind of adopt a technology and product, like a technology stack and a product suite that's going to not only grow with my business, but um, like change with the future, or at least like provide me the things that I need as technology, my residents and my buildings and the requirements of all of those change, right? Nobody wants to buy a solution today, spend the time implementing it, and 12 months from now have to migrate to something else, right? But as like from a startup perspective, no one wants to buy a solution when you don't know that the company is going to be around in 12 months, and then you'll have to migrate anyway. So I think that that's probably the main thing companies are struggling with or looking for today. Not like challenges with adopting technology. I think everyone at this point recognizes how important that is. The question is which ones and how do you get them to play nicely in a way that supports your business and delivers their benefits without adding time and headache and effort to your day to day.
Okay, so would I say that finding solutions are more accessible and easier to integrate in your business is something that if you were starting a company today is what you'd focus on?
Yeah, definitely. I think like um, being integrated with other platforms, other products is super important, not just from a usability, but from a distribution perspective. Um, this has probably changed slightly, but from like a Bixby perspective, there were kind of two or three major platforms that provided in particular, kind of like accounting services or accounting software, right? I mentioned one before called Yardi, another, and specifically their Voyager product. Maybe they have a new one or newer one since then, and RealPage and a couple of their platforms. At the time, they represented about 80% of the market, right? So 80% of landlords in the US or property managers in the US used one of those two products, right? At the time, this was a loose requirement, but my guess is it's probably like a heavy requirement today, which is if you wanted an owner or an operator to adopt your technology, the more sophisticated groups back then would say you've got to be integrated with Yardi or RealPage, right? We don't want to do double data entry. We want any maintenance requests or any payment that flows through your system and has to flow down to these other systems. We're not going to do manual reconciliations. At the time, you could get away with not having those integrations. Today, I don't think it's possible. And these are not easy integrations to do. They're difficult from a technology perspective, and they're expensive as well. But in terms of creating a unified system for the owner or the operator, which is important to them, therefore it's important to the purchasing decision. I think you basically need to start at what problems do landlords have that aren't currently being served or served well by existing solutions, that I can sit on top of one of these other solutions, for example, live in their marketplace. You can kind of think of these companies today, they're almost like app stores, right? For landlords. You go on Yardi's like partnership page, and it lists all of the companies that they're integrated with. If I'm a landlord today who uses Yardi as like my core accounting system, and I need to find a solution for, in the ESG space for energy efficiency, I'm probably starting at Yardi's partnership page to see who's done the work to do the integration. Who's done the work to do the integration, and I'd probably start by looking at those products to see if any of them fill my needs before I start looking elsewhere. And my guess, without knowing kind of the specifics, is that the companies that are integrated and listed on those pages have really started to feel that power of distribution among Yardi's customer base, for example. So yeah, I think it's very important to be integrated with the right solutions. Again, both from a day-to-day perspective and a purchasing or sales perspective.
I think the analogy of solutions being like an app store is perfect because you can scroll and just see as many as you want, but it's always really hard to make a decision when there's sometimes similar ones.
Agreed, yeah. And in terms of like an app store, if it's interesting, and maybe we'll get to it at some point today, but I mean, AI and ChatGPT and GPTs, as they were announced in the last couple of weeks, I mean, there's a completely new app store coming, right? And a completely new interface. And I find it really interesting. And I think that if I were starting a business today, kind of a real estate technology business, I'd probably start by taking a real good look at what's going on with ChatGPT as an interface, what kind of GPTs already exist that serve the real estate market, and are there ones that I might be well suited to create.
Do you hear about the JLL GPT? Have you heard about that?
I haven't, but I'd love for you to tell me about it.
Essentially, it's a chat GPT for like the commercial real estate that's meant to make it easier for not just the people working within JLL to whether that's on the property management or anything like that. The model is essentially meant to, you're meant to be able to ask anything to it, and then it helps in terms of it looks through their database, finds all the information, the relevant information, and makes the whole process easier. My initial thought, kind of being on the outside as well, from reading that, I was thinking there's a large thing that there's a large threat that people seem to see in terms of when you see stuff like this, like the GPT models that are going into every sector, not just prop tech, but if we're going specifically prop tech, it's like the more administrative side of commercial real estate, which is something that actually is sometimes a large percentage of the job. For example, if you're an estate agent, you do a lot of admin. It's kind of scary that a lot of AI can essentially replace your day-to-day work, and then you'd be left with the other also hard but not as much of a job as well. If that was my initial thought. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big debate, right? What's like is AI going to replace jobs or is it going to augment jobs? We can have a long debate and conversation about this. I think from the things I've read and as a result, my perspective is usually when you have this kind of fear with almost every technological revolution, right? Um, Same exact thing happened with computers and the internet. It's going to kill jobs. And that didn't happen in either case, right? It grew GDP substantially. Um, I tend to find that it'll be the same thing here. I don't think it, and there's a lot of smarter people who go in depths about these topics and like labor versus output, for example. And this is being talked about across every industry, from music and entertainment to real estate to travel and beyond. Um, I do believe that AI will enable individuals to do more with less, right? And focus on the higher value things. An estate agent spends a lot of time um, like updating inventory, right? And updating listings. Their time is better spent selling, meeting with new clients, meeting with new landlords, finding new units to list, right? Not filling out inputs on a website. So if you can reduce their time spent, you're not taking the work away, you're enabling them to focus on higher value things. And that's how I look at it at the moment and how I think it will shake out, at least for the short to medium term.
That's the best perspective that I've gotten so far. Uh, so we just had a bit of a glitch in the system. So we're going to go on from where we were, which was talking about the GPT models and how it's going to, we use the example of estate agents. It's going to allow them to spend less time on, for example, putting listings up and all the other tasks that aren't necessarily as important as them actually selling their houses or selling their properties or what in terms of anything. So that's what we were talking about just then. And I wanted to move on from that and continue talking about AI. And where do you think there's availability for increased development, and how do you think this is going to surface in the next few years? Because we've obviously talked about the past and how we've gotten to this area right now, and we've talked about the importance of like the app store, of the example of being able to pick the right solutions that are good for your business. But from where we are now, where do you see the real estate industry and prop tech in say 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I feel a bit more optimistic about when I think about the next 5 to 10 years, I'm a bit more optimistic than I had been more recently. And what I mean by that is I've spoken a bit today about kind of being at the end of a cycle. And me myself, I'm a bit on the sidelines right now, kind of looking and listening and learning, because for the first time in maybe 10 years since becoming an entrepreneur, I suppose, I don't have a ton of conviction about any one thing, or definitely, or specifically as it relates to the real estate industry. But that's not to say that I don't think that there's opportunity there and that the real estate industry is going to stagnate and it's going to revert to its old ways and there's no opportunity to build and create value in the industry. And I'm more optimistic today because I actually do see quite a lot of change on the horizon. I think that AI has to do with that. I think what I said before about COVID and the acceleration of the digitization of real estate has to do with that. And I think it's a mental mind shift in the owners and operators, as well as a changing of the guard, right? Which is kind of one of the things that a lot of us were waiting for, right? The 80-year-old landlord still holding on to his property, passing it along to his son or daughter or successor, and that individual having grown up with a very different relationship with technology, right? It's very different to have grown up with a smartphone, right? Whether you've got whether you got your first smartphone when you were, born in the 2000s and got it when you were 5, or born in the late 80s like me and got it when you were in high school or even later. But we have a very, millennials and definitely Gen Z, we've got a very different relationship with technology than our fathers and mothers and predecessors did. For somebody who's starting out in the real estate industry today to say, hey, grab a pen and paper and go send a fax, like that was okay 20 years ago. That's not really going to fly. Your new employee is going to be like, what the hell is a fax machine? And so, right. And so there's a different perspective to technology. Adoption has accelerated. And so the question is like, where do we go from here? And I think all of the things that I've spoken about in terms of investors looking at opportunities differently, entrepreneurs needing to look at opportunities differently, doing the hard things, going deeper into the real estate stack, right? Being a vertically integrated company, or maybe you own, operate, and build technology. A company like Common comes to mind that really took that approach. And they kind of started in co-living as operators with real estate partners. They're now building 500-unit multifamily properties that they're part owners in, they manage, and that runs on their proprietary technology, right? That's what the company of the future is going to look like, and more, right? And that and more, I think those are the exciting things. I think the and more will and need to be focused on ESG. I'm going to use that as like a big umbrella term because everything from the materials that we use to the way that we build, to the way that we maintain, and the way that we deliver service must be more sustainable, right? The real estate industry is one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions, right? And we, as an industry, have a responsibility to change the way we do things and to be part of the solution. Um, and I think that I think that investors will back that. I think they are backing that. And I think that entrepreneurs will seize the opportunity to deliver that to owners, to operators, to residents, tenants, consumers, the world. I'm really excited to see that. I think that AI will have something to do with that. It will have a lot to do with that. I think that machine learning, I think that robotics, the confluence of those three things will change the way that we build and manage real estate. Um, if I knew exactly what that would look like, I would be building already. Um, but I know that there are many entrepreneurs around the world who are building in this general category. They were using these tools. And I think that the real estate industry is really excited to adopt them. You mentioned JLL GPT. I think it's always JLL in the last decade has invested a lot in technology. When we were starting Bixby, we used to say, in the next 10 years, you're going to see real estate companies have chief digital officers, right? And you do today, right? Whether it's a JLL or a CBRE, you've got chief digital officers, you have chief technology officers. Technology is a core part of these companies' business. Um, and they're leading by example in terms of using the data that they have to create an AI chatbot that will support their employees and will provide a better customer experience. The big companies have a real opportunity to change their business. The smart ones have already begun to, but that doesn't mean that startups and entrepreneurs won't be able to create novel solutions and participate in this next revolution in real estate. So on the one hand, things generally change a bit slower than we all expect, often. Are we going to be living in a smart city under the sea in 5 years? Is someone going to build find the lost city of Atlantis? Or are we going to be living in bubbles like in the new Avatar film? Will we be living on Mars? Right? Probably not at least, in the next decade. But you're already seeing from like the developments in construction, such as like prefabrication, how quickly you're able to, you can put together a home like a Lego, right? And it's a fraction of the cost of what it used to be. And there are housing shortages around the world, right? So I'm excited to see individuals, companies, teams solve those problems, and I think that they will. And I also think you'll see kind of things that you don't, not that you don't expect, but maybe we kind of saw in sci-fi films like 50 years ago. The smart home, that hasn't quite landed, right? And I know we talked briefly before this a little bit about IoT, the Internet of Things and sensors, and we saw a lot of exciting things happen in the 2010s. You had companies like Nest and companies like Ring, these kind of hardware providers, be really successful. And of course, the development of chatbots like Alexa and Siri. But I can't say, it doesn't feel to me like there's truly been like mass market adoption of the interconnected smart home. I think a lot of consumers have something, right? An Amazon Alexa sitting in their kitchen, maybe a couple smart light bulbs, maybe a smart lock on the front door, maybe all three of those things. But I don't think that most homes, offices have like the full orchestration, right? You walk into your home and it sets the light, just how you want it. And the meal starts, the meal is like, your meal is like a little pill that's in the microwave that just start heating, and all of a sudden it's a gourmet meal, Jetsons type stuff. But I think we're gonna get there. You're gonna see a world with flying cars and smart homes. And it's going to be a really interesting century. So yeah, so I'm optimistic, but I'd love to see solving the hard, important problems first, right? Shelter, access to clean water, right? Um, and one might think like that's kind of outside of the sphere of real estate, but like it's kind of not, right? At the end of the day, you like the delivery of water. I mean, these are maybe municipal systems, but like ultimately they're delivered to the consumer often inside a premise, right? Um, and so real estate, I think, does have a part to play in solving problems like that as well.
Well, going to the not so optimistic side, looking at the recent WeWork bankruptcy, what's your take or your view on the co-working industry and the office sector more broadly, specific and more broadly?
Yeah. Okay. So this is one where I spent a lot of time. I mean, I left the resident experience property management world to pursue the future of remote work and relatedly, the flexible and service office product, right? Um, when COVID hit and we were all forced to work from home, I thought that there was a massive consumer shift underway where we all learned that individuals can and teams can work remotely using technologies that we now use every day and still be as productive, if not more productive, than when we're coming into a centralized office all the time. Um, and not to mention, the impacts on quality of life that has, so that you spend less time commuting, more time with your friends and family, save money on real estate costs, right? And what I thought that we were going to see I thought we'd see two things. One, kind of a correction in the real estate market, a decrease in demand for office space, that therefore reprices the market essentially. But also, I thought that landlords were going to have to adopt a more flexible product offering. And co-working is kind of the one of those more flexible product offerings, right? And there's different flavors of co-working is one, but serviced office is quite different. Like flexible leases it's a little bit different than co-working itself. But so I really thought that if you're a landlord, say like Hines in the US or a Brookfield out of Canada, and you've got an office portfolio, that like some 30%, I think I think JLL actually predicted that years ago, that like by 2030, 30% of the office market will be considered flexible, right? And so if you translate that down to a building, you kind of, think about your high-end luxury office tower in, in the city in London. Maybe 70% of that building will continue to be traditional leases, right? Long-term 10, 20-year leases. But the other 30% would be some mix of a more flexible product, maybe a couple of floors of short-term serviced offices, maybe a floor of co-working. And they would kind of become there would be a product that serves a different kind of customer, depending on if you're a founder who needs, a desk, a remote worker who needs a place to work away from home a few days a week, or a growing company who needs a dedicated office space. And I think you are seeing that. But I think that it's a harder for a while, that product, and WeWork is the best example of this, was seen as like a premium product and like a high growth business, right? That's evidenced by like the amount of money that was poured into WeWork in a very like technology company type of way, at least from like the pricing and the expectations on returns. But really, I think that these are just they're just different product offerings, right? In an old uh, industry that's existed for a very long time. What I mean by that is hotels, hotels have been around for centuries, right? Um, and you have different hotels that serve different customers and different tastes and different needs, right? You have a whole set of hotels that serve the business traveler, and you have a whole set of hotels that serve the leisure family vacation. And you have some hotels that are luxury hotels, some hotels that are budget hotels. And then you have Airbnb who came and added a whole bunch of inventory to the hotel market by allowing, you know, residents to participate by listing their rooms or their homes. You don't really, I mean, and you have that in office, but not in as diverse a way, right? You have like Class B or Class C office assets. You have Class A luxury towers, but it's all kind of the same product, and like it's a long-term lease, right? You sign a lease for 10 years and you get some space. But now there are different like forms of it. You can sign a 10-year lease, but maybe it comes with um I don't know, an office manager who's like maintaining the food and the beverage, or like providing some kind of catering services. Um, you have the traditional co-working product where you can pay by the month for a desk or pay by the month for a small office. Um, and we were kind of like they brought several different products to market based on the needs and the profile of the customer, right? They had enterprise clients who they were providing really what was just a serviced office solution, right? We'll give you office space, we'll help you build it out, and we'll put a service layer on top of it, right? All the way down to the remote worker or the founder or the freelancer who just needs a place to come in and work, and space as a service is the buzzword here, but you got space and a desk and Wi-Fi and a printer and coffee, right? So what I mean by saying all of this is I think that there's a place for that product. I think it's continuing to grow. I think you see a lot of different operators and a lot of different flavors. Again, like a lot of different hotel brands, the equivalent of a lot of different hotel brands and offerings, right? You've got everyone from like a Soho house and a Soho Works to like your community co-working space. That's like your really local neighborhood, co-working operator. Um, but these are real estate businesses, and they should be funded like real estate businesses, and the return expectation should match those of a real estate business. And I think that's kind of where that's where the industry is today in a healthy way, right? Acknowledging that. I don't think you're going to see another WeWork. You're not going to see like a VC-backed co-working operator, but you're going to see an operator that like kind of like a Starbucks, right? Like grows one location at a time through real estate financing and becomes like a great real estate business. And you'll see these offerings as part of landlords' portfolios because it's like it's another product that they should offer because there's a customer for it and it will perform. So I don't think that co-working is dead. I don't necessarily think that like its growth is slowing down. I mean, at least compared to like a WeWork, it's very much slowing down, right? But you'll continue to see its growth. You'll continue to see a larger percentage of office inventory and square footage be some kind of flexible product. And it's just going to be, if you look at a real estate company or like an office REIT in 10 years, all of the revenue 10 years ago came from long-term leases. 10 years from now, Like day pass access, it'll be on that pie chart. Probably it's not going to be 50% of their income, but it'll be 5%, maybe another 10 or 20% from their serviced office operation. And then, the other 50 to 70 from long-term leases.
I mean, looking at all the opportunities that there are in like a vast industry like real estate and prop tech, in regards to building a business, what advice would you give to an entrepreneur looking to merge real estate and then technology together? Based on your experiences, what are the most important qualities, or what's the most important aspects of your journey that you'd say you need to apply?
I think it probably goes back to to doing the hard things. I think when I see entrepreneurs today, like creating a new app, or like building a new rental marketplace, or building a resident experience software, I'm like, you got to dig deeper, right? Anybody can build an app today. ChatGPT will build you one in an hour, right? And you can use no-code tools like Bubble. The barrier to entry is so low and the market is so saturated and the economics and the scale are so difficult. I push entrepreneurs to do the hard things, right? Don't build, with Flow as an example. I mean, it's a totally different business, but rather than building a marketplace that connects consumers to physical locations like workspaces and gyms and spas, you probably want to build a portfolio of those locations, right? And then use technology to drive efficiencies on the operations side of things, drive experience on the consumer side of things. That's that's probably the general advice that I would give entrepreneurs today. Now they'll say, like, they might say, well, look, like, I'm a software engineer. Building an app is like, that's something I can do. But like buying and managing buildings, it's heavy, it's not scalable. I don't know how to do it. Well, I'd say, yeah, but look, you're going to build this technology, you're going to sell it into an operator. You're going to, in the case of Bixby, you're going to get to 1,000 units using your platform. You're going to be making $1,000 a month, right? In revenue. You can't, that's not a sustainable business. You can't hire anybody with that. And you're going to need to get to 100,000 units before to make 100,000 a month, which, by the way, like, still pretty small. You're a small business still in that case, right? But if you open one co-working location, you're probably, depending on the size of the location, etc., you're probably doing 100,000 a month, like, pretty quick if you do a good job marketing it, etc. And now you're generating cash, right? And that cash you can use to invest in your technology. And then you open another 5 locations and you're getting close to 1 million, right, a month in revenue. And now you're building out your technology, you're implementing it into your own operation. You're gaining operational efficiencies from that. But you've got a cash flow business that's supporting you, your team, and allowing you to grow. And maybe one day you spin out the technology, right? And you can sell that, but you've still got like a real core business with real assets. I think that's really the approach that entrepreneurs today need to take. It's different, it's harder, it's different financing. It's not the, build a website in the late 90s and sell it for $10 million. It's not, build a mobile app in the early 2010s and grow to 1 million users where you're not even monetizing and sell it for $1 billion to Google. Some will still do that. But I think it was hard then. I think it's much harder today. And I think that investors are looking for real businesses that generate cash and have a straight line to profitability, even if that's years out, right? But the mentality is very different than the scale at all costs, burn as much as you need. And as an entrepreneur or as a business, you're only as good as like the gas that you've got in the tank. That gas is in the form of cash, right? And today, it's much harder to raise $1 million in your first round and then 10 million in your second round and then 50 million in your third round while not being able to point to clearly to profitability. And so like you need to figure out how to generate cash much sooner than you did 5 or 10 years ago. Because you just won't be able to raise that cash that you need to continue scaling the business to to the point where it becomes a big enough business where it can actually sustain itself. So that's really what I would say. And then I would also say like you got to look deeper. Like you got to look deeper. You got to be smarter. And you got to really work on the hard shit. The hard things, right? You got to like, and like Thrive Capital is a company that talks about this a lot, like transformational, right? Not like point solutions that make this a little better or that a little better. And like, again, the example is, Alfred's a great example. When I was at Alfred, we decided to buy a management company and become property managers, right? Well, what was that all about? Like we were a technology business and a service business, and like we were asset light, and we got into the very like asset heavy, non-scalable, low multiple property management business. But you're generating real cash there, right? You're collecting rent every single month. And I think that like whether you're getting into the, like cleaning toilets and becoming a property manager such that you can layer the technology on top of it, or you're changing the way homes are powered, right? And I don't just mean adding another sensor to like your power source, but I mean like full switch to electrification, nuclear, right? Like you got to skip, like you need to take big steps, not incremental steps, if you want to have the kind of big impacts that like gets investors excited, that gets consumers excited, landlords, etc. So I think as like for entrepreneurs, like we all need to dig deeper. We need to do the hard stuff.
So work hard, work smart, and find some source of cash flow that is sustainable so that you can also grow, whether that's in 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah, pretty much. I would warn entrepreneurs today from like, I think you need a real competitive advantage, right? You need real access to capital. You need real access to distribution. You need a lot of things really in place before you take the plunge and do this. Or you're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of money. And there's nothing more valuable than your time. So I'd urge entrepreneurs that are thinking about taking the plunge, do the work to be ready, right? You need to have a unique insight. You need to have a unique ability to like take advantage of that insight or execute on it. And it's not just knowledge, it's relationships and connections as well. It's a strategy, and it's capital. And all of that stuff, some of those things are easier today than they used to be. Some are harder, but I think you need to spend those nights and weekends before you're ready to dive in full time.
So like burning the midnight oil.
Like you got to take care of yourself, but yeah, like if you're not burning the midnight oil, somebody else is. And they'll probably be the ones that you're reading about in a few years when you say, oh man, I had that idea I was going to do that, but you didn't, and that person did, and they were probably up real late at night, putting in the blood, sweat, and tears.
So I wanted to ask you two more questions. Mainly one being, do you think the relationships between founders and companies, between founders, companies, and then real estate owners and operators has changed in the last decade? And if so, how?
I do think that you're seeing a bit more of like a partnership today, less like, I think it has a bit to do with like this opco thing I'm talking about. Basically, like owners and operators need technology, and technology entrepreneurs need scale, right? And I think that you're seeing a bit more of a symbiotic relationship there. Like Alfred's another good example where, the investors early on, Greystar was, and I believe still is, the biggest investor in the company, right? Um, and it, they delivered to each other those things, right? Greystar delivered scale to Alfred, and Alfred delivered a new perspective on how to deliver the multifamily experience, plus investments in technology and innovation. So I think that you're seeing more of that. When it comes to like some of the advice that we just gave to entrepreneurs, I think if you're breaking into the real estate industry, those kinds of partnerships are absolutely crucial, right? Um, Again, scale is hard. And if you can partner with a landlord that can provide that to you while you're building out your technology, that will help you have that cash flow in the early days, right? Um, and really give you a really great platform to build off of. So I do think that there's a more symbiotic, more partnership relationship today than there was 10 years ago, where we were really convincing landlords and operators um, the value of technology, and it was much more of like a buyer-seller relationship.
Now they need to work together. Just going kind of back to your one of the example you used earlier, which is like a property manager who'd been operating for 50 years, him now after COVID needing like understanding that technology is very important to his job or his business model. So the last question, if you could invest in one thing today, what would it be?
Hmm.
It's a hard one.
Microsoft, Microsoft and Nvidia, because they've got like, Microsoft owns, I think, 50% of OpenAI, and then Nvidia really powers all of basically the compute that's needed for AI. And Microsoft is an incredibly important part of the infrastructure for delivering all of this. So like I mean, they've done a great job of getting ahead, I think, of this opportunity. You think, I haven't thought of Microsoft, I tend to, over the last 10 or 20 years, think about Google or Apple before I think about Microsoft. And then for the first time in a long time, I think that that's, for me, changing a little bit. But outside of, or more specific to real estate, um, I think, I think we've got a big responsibility when it comes to the climate and the future of the planet. Um, I think that if you're an entrepreneur today, there's no better place to spend your energy, time, and money than solutions that make the planet a better place to live today and for the humans of the future. So I would be investing in that category. That's very broad. So more specifically, I mean, energy is a big one. Moving to more sustainable sources of energy. It's like way easier said than done. And frankly, I'm not smart enough on the category to call out any specific companies. And I'm not actively investing at the moment. But if I was, I would very much be looking in ESG. And I think that if you're an entrepreneur in the real estate technology category, um, it's not like you just certainly shouldn't be ashamed of yourself if you're doing things that aren't related to ESG. Um, but for me personally, that is probably the only thing that I would, the primary thing that I would really be interested in. There's like AI is very exciting in a lot of ways, but I would probably be looking and I'd love to find companies that are solving problems related to ESG using AI. Um, but sustainability is really the name of the game for me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mark. I really appreciate it. For anybody else looking to get into contact with him, what's the best way to get into contact with you?
I guess LinkedIn is probably the best. You can find me there. I apologize, I'm not the best at responding, but if you're persistent enough, you'll get to me eventually.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Moses.